Well, welcome to our podcast. I'm Mary Abazia, and with me, of course, is Tom Spitali and Sean Wellham. We have been talking a lot about storytelling, and we've been talking a lot about AI, and we have received some really good requests for us to kind of mash those two together more and explain how we're using it, how we're seeing our clients using AI to do storytelling. So, Tom, would you like to kick this off a bit?
Yeah, we talked, as you said, Mary, a little bit last week about uh, important elements of a really good story. And one of those early elements is to, I don't know, create some relatability. In a good story, you relate to the key character. And we did talk a bit about who should be the hero of the story, right? We said that a mistake that a lot of commercial people make when they are telling a story is they make their brand or their product the star of the story when really it should be about the customer. So I would just like to throw it open to you guys based on kind of what you have seen um, in terms of how people are using our tools to create that relatability like early in the story. And maybe then we can kind of move on to what happens in the middle and then the conflict happens and what happens at the end when that conflict is resolved, but without being able to relate to the hero of the story or loss. So what are some of the tools that you guys have seen from our toolkit that people have been using to create that relatability around the hero?
Okay, I'll go first.
Oh, okay. You go, Mary.
Yeah, I like when people use the trends because it kind of like, when you're at a theater and the lights change and even if the fog comes, I mean, the trends are part of that setting that says, the economy is X and, and AI is creeping in and, all of those trends, there's more, this new technology, it kind of sets the stage so that the drama begins and people start to already buy in because the whole trick is to get them to buy in early. And that's one of the things that I like seeing how it gets built. Sean?
World of inflation and AI taking over.
Yes.
Sounds familiar. I think it's also useful for the cast of characters. Every good story's got characters, antagonists, protagonists, all the heroes and villains stuff. And we take a time to look at our potential customers and stakeholders. So the stakeholder map gives you this broad universe of characters that interact with each other. And you bring in the competitors. Further down the road, we identify competitors. So all these people with name, the sort of parts of our tools where you can slap a name badge on someone, right? So who the characters are. So I think a really powerful part is assembling a list of interrelated and interesting characters that form the basis for the story to evolve.
Couldn't agree more. Early on trends, stakeholders, and of course, you know what I'm going to say. Needs-based
Segment stuff.
segmentation, right? And the reason that and it's follow-on tool, the persona, in which we not only define different sets of customer needs, different segments, but we kind of build out that persona. When we build that persona or wanted poster in our workshops, people draw pictures of that represent the segment and representative quotes. And this is where I think the relatability comes into a good story. I mean, I think that the person delivering the story needs to do one really important thing. And that is to be able to vary the story based on who they're talking to today. And what we've always seen as hugely relatable is if you're talking to somebody in a particular segment and you're telling a story about the challenges of somebody in their same segment, you have relatability right away. Because if you've done this job well, they say, that sounds like me. They might not give you those cues verbally, but you might see them taking notice and sitting up because in the back of their head, they're saying, yep, those are some of the issues and problems that I've seen. So that persona not only defines the segment's needs, but really some of the unresolved needs, some of the issues that they're facing. And I think when you're telling a really good story, not only are you bringing in the tale of somebody that's like the person you're telling the story to, but you're articulating their challenges really, really well and their frustrations really, really well. So I think those are the three probably, tools, three A, right? And trend, stakeholder mapping, segmentation with 3A being the persona, you begin to get a really good relatability factor built into your story.
The only thing I would add to that, Tom, because you missed it off, was the competitors. And I just think they provide that antagonist role in a story. They're the ones that are after the same thing as you. They're after the business of the customer. So you've got to beat them somehow. You've got, whether that's by being, segmented approach and a specific offer, but either way, you have to beat them, and they're there looking to spoil your day by taking the revenue that you want to get. So I always think it's
So
important to factor that in.
I agree. And it's tricky because if you're doing it from the customer's perspective, though, competitors are not really the problem. They're actually part of the answer. And I am being a little bit of, I'm pushing back just a little bit because if you if you really wear the hat of the customer, you're thinking that any of those competitors are actually options that I have for what I want to do. So the more competitors, the better for me, because then I can play the game. So it's Tom, you were going to say something?
Well, I think you're both right. I think for me, where competitors come in is they span that beginning part where you're building relatability. That's the part where you're trying to talk about customer frustration and unresolved needs, right? Things that maybe customer or competitors are trying to resolve and haven't yet. But when you move into that conflict stage, you really build that out, right? The conflict is that customers have issues that are unresolved. You're not going to be talking to customers or telling a story about a customer about a resolved issue, unless it's something that ups the ante on that resolution. You're most likely going to be setting the stage around things that both you as a company and your competitors have really not resolved yet. So I think you talk about them, competitors, a little bit kind of seeps into that relatability factor. But when you really get into the conflict, and what you're trying to do in a good story is magnify that conflict, right? Because that's what sucks people into the story. This is a big problem that has to be solved. And I think
I agree.
specifically, you start to get into that ability to win analysis, which kind of really is helpful in that.
Well, I think with that, I mean, I'm going to push back a little on the pushback because I still think we're crafting the story. We're crafting the story, and we have to position ourselves with the customer as the best option, as the savior, as the solution to their problem, knowing that they have choices. And when we look at our value prop and positioning work, we often say things. We use the phrase unlike. We pick a competitor and we say, unlike these guys, we've got this. We look for points of difference. That needs to come back through the story too. So even though I totally agree from the customer's perspective, they're not the enemy, they're just options. But from us, we have to frame them in a way that makes them the bad guys for us, so we can find their weak spots, we can exploit our strengths and position ourselves. So I think you still have to have them in mind as you craft the narrative because they're relevant. But I do take the point that they're not seen as the bad guys by the customer, they're seen as options. But nevertheless, I think we have to include them in the story for the
Oh, it's
reasons I
got to be
just
a bad guy. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
And I think that in all good stories has a bad guy, right? I think you bring up a really interesting point that I think I've discovered in helping clients craft stories. I wonder if you guys have seen the same. You got to kind of work your way all the way through our system, the market customer competitor analysis, the differentiation strategy that you have, and even some of the execution types of plans that you have. And then I think you build the story because I agree with you, Sean. There's certain elements when you know ultimately where you're going to go with your strategy. It's kind of a really advanced point, but really you want to tell the best stories you possibly can, right? So if you can kind of knowing where that narrative is going to, I mean, the filmmaker knows how the movie ends, right? So, you write the script, and then the script being the outline, really being your strategy, and then the story flows from that, knowing where you're going and where you can insert in the relatability part, some things that you know about the competitors and the frustrations and in the conflict part and really even in the resolution part. I think that's how we found. Is it, I mean, are you guys seeing the same thing that you got to really kind of work your way through the entire strategy before you can build the story?
Totally. I often said, you've heard me say it, that using our tools for the first time is a bit like watching the movie The Sixth Sense. It only really makes sense when you get to the final act. And then you go, oh my God, he's been dead the whole time. Sorry, spoiler alert if no one hasn't seen it. But the other thing about that is what the tagline for that movie was, it's as the movie you'll have to see twice to see it once, because then when you see it again, you've got a totally different lens. So I think, and it so happens that's a story, but nevertheless, you get through all of our tools and you suddenly go, that's where we end up. That's the story. And then, to your point, Tom, you can then go back and craft the story from the beginning because you've got that final scene, that payoff. And that's so important to not tell half a story, right? Because maybe to Mary's point earlier, all you're doing is saying, here's a problem that needs solving, and they're going to run after their competitors to get it solved, right? We've got to sell the solution as well and the resolution. So, yeah, I think you're right. Soup to nuts, the whole range before you
I think
start.
that like you can't write a story without having the ability to win in your planning stage. No one that hears your story is going to know that you used a planning tool called the ability to win, because we're really trying to get the look at it through the customer's eyes. But good stories, as you said, Tom, will be, at the segment level, focusing on the things that are really important to them. Because I think stories fall apart when the salesperson talks all about something that is important to the product but not important to the customer. That might be a very low thing, or it may not be something that differentiates. So that ability to win allows you to see where you do have the differentiation that is important to that customer. And that really is like when you're getting to the top of the story, the mountain. This is like, okay, now we have identified how we're going to solve the problem. That's where that starts to happen. So
Yeah,
I think that if you try to do a story without the ability to win perspective, it will fall flat.
Yep.
totally
Well,
agree.
there's also something, Sean, that you mentioned earlier, about positioning and the fact that, which is later in the process, right? Later in our strategic planning process, getting towards that execution phase, really late in the differentiation phase, when you've got to define uniquely what your product or service or portfolio does, right? It's not good positioning if it's not unique, important, and believable. And the most important of these is unique, being unique in the marketplace. And you've got to know what that's going to be, even to get right back to, even the relatability early part. And especially as you start to get into the conflict part, you know, you want to build a story that is angling towards what you do uniquely. Now, you don't want to make this up, right? And the marketplace will discover you if you try to engineer that in the right way. So what the planning process and our tools do is make sure you're heading in the right direction, rethinking perhaps the way you've positioned in the past. And if, because maybe it's not unique enough, maybe it's not important, maybe it's targeted at the wrong segments. But ultimately, it's what makes you be able to, at that point, once you're starting to get there, you can really start that, I think, start craft all aspects of the story, the relatability to the hero at the beginning, the conflict in the middle, and now you've got that resolution at the end.
Yeah. And I just wanted to add some to what Mary said, 'cause I totally agree with the whole the ability to win and really the step before the benefits ladder approach, to try and find what's important to the customer. Why is this important rule? Many of us people who work with this will know. And that's so critical because when you are putting that story together, if you can have a great story selling the wrong benefit. This is your point, man. I'm just reiterating it because it ties back to the tool, the benefits tool. But if we're saying like, they really enjoyed the brushed aluminium case that could withstand 10 pounds of pressure, it's like they don't, because they don't care about that. What they care about is what that aluminium case does for them in terms of durability and portability and so forth. So unless you've actually got those, what's that mean to the customer rather than what is it? What's the feature that we're talking? You could have a story that would tell a lot of detail about what something is, but not necessarily what it does for you or what it's used for. And that makes a very boring story, doesn't it?
I I can't believe. I mean, I guess today we use that benefits ladder, Sean, so intrinsically with the segmentation tool that sometimes in my mind I talk about segmentation, and in my mind it's including the benefits ladder, but it's a disservice that I didn't call it out earlier because you're right. What is another amazingly important aspect of a good story but emotion?
Mm.
And when you use that benefits ladder and you ask why is that important, not just to get clearly articulated benefits, but you get those up to those values, those emotions, and then you weave that into the story. I mean, what good story, what good movie that we've all seen doesn't have emotion in it? So, thanks for
Yeah,
bringing that up.
emotions.
That's just another piece of the critical puzzle to create that story arc
So
that
what we've said then is every single aspect of our tool is essential for telling a story. That's what I'm hearing from this, Tom. It's like there's nothing that's superfluous to writing a good story. Every
yeah.
every one of them is needed. It's the perfect framework for a story.
Yeah. I guess, and it's how you deliver it, the practical part of it. Tom, you asked about, what tools do you use in the beginning, middle, and the end? And part of the end is how do you make it so it doesn't blow up a salesperson's brain, like because I'm going to have different segments that I have to go tell my stories to. And, Tom, what I've seen you do well is take, a central theme that makes sense, but then how you adjust the beginning and the end are part of, the playbook, the sales playbook that they're able to take those stories through, and it still makes sense. So would you say a little bit about the back end and some of the things that you're seeing?
I would like to, Mary. How much time do we have left? Because I'm thinking that maybe we still have some time. What I want to do is maybe do one more podcast where we talk about some of the best practices that we've seen. But since you asked, I will say that we've seen storytelling segment specific storytelling be very similar to brand positioning, right? Where you've got a single, what we might call an umbrella branding for a product or service. And as you begin to talk to different segments that you are targeting, you don't want that segment story to be disconnected to your overall umbrella brand positioning. And so what the trick is to kind of make sure that they build on each other, right? It's like slightly different versions of the branding discussion, depending on what the segment cares about. But it does tie back to that central theme. I think the same thing with the storytelling is what we're finding is that the story can be a single really powerful story, but you can find ways that are executable for the sales force without, as you said, Mary, blowing their brains up that can be, slightly tweaked so that that particular customer today that you're talking to, relates and buys in. And, maybe we can talk more about that next week and some of the other things, best practices that we're discovering. I think today what the main theme is, yeah, we don't mean for this to be a commercial for our process, but what we have found is that our frameworks really do lend themselves with a little bit of tweak like we're talking about today to a really powerful story. I think we talked last time about what people get, wrong mostly about stories. Today we talked sort of about the mechanics. Let's talk next time about how to get it really, really right. And in a way that's executable that you can get your arms around without, not only blowing up your sales team, but your marketers' brains too, as they try to do their part in crafting a story that's delivered.
Excellent. Excellent. Sean, any closing thoughts?
No, I think Tom was saying we're not trying to do a commercial for the toolkit, but I think it's fair to say that when we came to storytelling, we came to it from the toolkit, and the two are very natural bedfellows. It just works really well together. So I would say that it is somewhat an advertisement for what we can do. It's a perfect frame for creating a story and a
Oh, let's just
storyboard.
say it. Let us help you with your story. We'd love to.
Your strategic story. Thank you so much. And again, we love your comments. Thank you.
Thanks.